Hello my fellow Archons, and welcome to another video. Now this is one I'm very excited for. Ghost Galaxy has distributed these Winds of Exchange pre-release kits to a whole bunch of game stores across North America, and eventually internationally, and they each contain 3 Winds of Exchange decks to do sealed alliance with. You open your 3 sealed WoW decks, and you can combine 3 of the 9 total pods together to create something as strong as possible. And they also include one of those nice chain trackers with the art on them and everything, which is pretty cool. Now there are lots of LGSs, or local game stores, participating in this pre-release event, which takes place over a couple weeks starting July 28th, and it just so happens that there are 3 of these events happening in my area, all on different days. There's one happening on Friday the 28th in Portage, another in Livonia on Saturday the 29th, and there's a third happening in Midland on Sunday the 30th. It's like the Bermuda Triangle of Keyforge, and I live just outside of it. So I figured, why not go to all 3 of them? Make it a whole weekend of Keyforge pre-release goodness. 3 Winds of Exchange events on 3 consecutive days. It'll be quite the commitment, but it'll also be a lot of fun, and I'm going to vlog the experience for you guys. I want to bring you guys along with me for this weekend so you all can see what it was like. Alright guys, how is it going? It is day 1 of this great Keyforge adventure, as you can see, Friday. I'm going to be heading to Portage here in Michigan for the very first day of the Keyforge Winds of Exchange pre-release tournament. I live about 2.5 hours away from Portage, meaning I'm going to have a very late night tonight because the event doesn't start until 8 p.m. I have a full day of work beforehand, and then I have a 2-hour drive to get to Portage at 8 p.m. and then the event, and then I'm driving another 2 hours back home. So it's going to be a very long day, but I'm super excited. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to head to work, and I will see you all in just a little while. Alrighty, I got out of work. I'm all packed up. I got my Keyforge stuff, my bits, my pieces, my game mat, my deck holder. And yeah, I'm about to start the 2-hour drive to Portage. Wish me luck. My first stop was in Portage, at a game store called Mark's Game Corner. It was a small, cozy little place with a play area near the back and actual Keyforge stock on the shelves, which was awesome to see. I arrived just in time for the tournament, and we immediately began cracking open our pre-release kits. I was pretty happy with my available pods, and one of the decks had the Prospector token, so I counted myself pretty lucky there. My other 2 tokens were Skirmisher and Cleric. However, the person sitting directly across from me, Josh, otherwise known as Yo-Yo Milkworm, hit the token creature jackpot, scoring Prospector, Emberling, and Berserker in his decks. However, while his tokens were some of the best, his pods were not, and while I expected him to go far with such a perfect selection of tokens, the quality of his actual cards were not enough to save his alliance. I looked carefully through my 9 pods, and over the course of the time limit set for deck construction, I landed on 4 pods that I especially liked over all the rest. The first was this Unfathomable pod with double Abyssal Sight, some fantastic disruption, and double Maelstrom, incredibly important board control. Cop and Fuguru were both really nice to have as well, must answer threats for the opponent, and double Adult Swim was good anti-token tech. I knew I wouldn't really be getting any value out of the weak link unless I could combo it with Feist Aloha somehow, but overall I really liked the look of the Fish House. Secondly was this really solid Equidon pod. What immediately stuck out to me was the Ember Control, double Generous Offer, and double Trade Secrets, along with a puzzling trinket in case I needed some clutch capture or something. Double Belligerent Guard could act as some solid instant board removal, and double Auction Off provided some important artifact control. The Equidon covered the 2 critical bases of Ember Control and Artifact Control, so I had to rock with it. And then I was left with 2 pods that were extremely hard for me to choose between, because they both contained things I liked the look of. The first was this Sanctum pod. It offered a ton of Ember Control. Between Almsmaster, Katarina, Martyr, double Mariana, and double Outflank, I was pretty set on Ember Control pretty much every time I called Sanctum. There was even a membership drive and Baldric for some burst potential. The competition was this Mars pod, and for one reason alone, this Clone Home enhanced with 2 Ember Pips. I figured that if I could really start snowballing with my board and keep playing Clone Home turn after turn for a third of a key's value every time, that could be tough to deal with. It also had some other nice tools, like a couple Mesmerists with the Rebel and Brain Dart, but in the end I preferred what the Sanctum had to offer, so I went with that one instead. There was another Unfathomable pod that looked nice too, with triple Maelstrom, Befuddle, a couple Fathom Reavers, and Illusions, so there was some potential there, but I still preferred the other one. My third Unfathomable pod was pretty lackluster, as were the Star Alliance, Saurian, and Brobnar pods I also opened, so those ones aren't really worth reviewing. I'll have them here on screen if you want to look at them though, and do some strategy for yourself, but in the end, I went with a solid Unfathomable Equidon Sanctum lineup that I believed had some real potential, and I chose the Prospector token since that was the easy, obvious choice. And so, my first game began. My first opponent was, naturally, Yo-Yo Milkworm, the guy from earlier who had hit the token creature jackpot. He was running the Berserker token along with a Brodnar pod containing Triple Shock Herder and a Might Club, so as the game went on, I knew my board had very little chance of sticking around. Sure enough, I started falling behind on board pretty early, and at one point I was left with a single Prospector on the board, which he made the fatal mistake of killing because it drew me into a Maelstrom. Without that insanely clutch Prospector draw, I'm pretty confident I would have lost that game, but the board clear helped me catch up. He also hit me with a pretty painful Thalassophobia pretty early into the game, discarding both my Abyssal Sights, but I had some really strong Equidon steals as the game went on, and I checked for my third key at exactly 6 Ember. Miraculously, he wasn't able to stop my check at 6, so I barely won my first game, though it was a real nail-biter. I then went into round 2 against a great guy named Randall. This game was also extremely tight. He went with Belatoran Warrior as his token, and honestly I wasn't surprised that I was seeing so many bulky tokens, since they tend to be among the more powerful of the token creatures in the set. As the game progressed, I became increasingly happy with my choice to include the Sanctum Pod, because it was able to keep him off his keys pretty consistently. I also had this cool play where I fought with my Shizuoku Swapper into his Grey Augur, so he swapped control of those creatures. Then I fought with the Belligerent Guard that his Augur was now next to for some extra Ember gain. And a little later, when I checked for my third key, I was able to exhaust his Aquila Lone Hero, which ultimately won me the game. Without access to that capture effect, he was unable to stop me, and I took the W, leaving me with a 2-0 record so far. My third game was against a younger player named Gavin, who had actually only started playing the game a few days before this tournament. You would have never guessed though, he was playing super well for someone who had just started. I was extremely impressed with his strategy and knowledge of how to make plays in his favor. He was running a deck with Trooper, yet another huge token, but one infamous for the amount of Ember it puts on the board. And sure enough, as he continued to use his Troopers and exalt them, I was able to take all that Ember with some well-timed Maelstroms. There was also this insane turn where I was checking with 14 Ember in my pool, he had 0 in his, and he played Closed Door Negotiation for a huge steal, and my hand increased in size drastically. This was another really tight game. He was able to spit out Troopers like nobody's business, which synergized really well with the Faust he had in his Saurian pod. However, in a clutch moment, I was able to remove it from his hand with an Abyssal Sight and seal the win for myself, putting me at 3-0. Round 4 was the semifinals, and I was up against a really disgusting deck with Halifest in the Brobnar and Scholar as the token. My opponent, a guy named Sean, was actually just running with a raw, unchanged deck that played super well, so that was cool to see. Sure enough, his board was terrifying, but my Maelstroms were able to keep it in check and ruin the potency of his Halifest. The deck was real scary to play against. I was on edge the whole time, but my Sanctum stalled his keys phenomenally, long enough for me to acquire a nice lead and secure the win, putting me at 4-0. Honestly, at this point I was shocked to have such a winning record, and I knew the finals would be no joke. I went into the finals against a guy named Chris, who was running the Rebel token. The finals were best of 3, and I acquired a pretty solid lead in the first game, but in the third act of the match, his Mars came out in full force, and I witnessed the absolute beast I'd have to face in the upcoming matches. Triple Ironix Rebel, a couple Mesmerists, Xanthix Harvester, well-enhanced Clone Homes, and the Rebel token. I feel like there may have also been a Hypnotic Command in there somewhere, but I don't remember for sure. This Mars came out perfectly, and brought him back from the brink, and I lost my first game that evening to a truly brutal House of Aliens. The second best of 3 match began, and things went in my favor. I had a couple really bursty steal plays with Equidon, and one of my Abyssal Sights hit his epic poem, which was a huge relief. He just wasn't able to catch up to me, and his Mars came out really awkwardly. I got the win game 2, so it all came down to the rubber match. The very last match commenced, and I mulliganed into the worst hand I have ever seen. Both my Maelstroms were in this pitiful 5-card hand of mine, along with 3 more absolutely useless late game cards that I didn't want to see for another 4 or 5 turns. Needless to say, that horrendous start put me on my back foot instantly, and it didn't help that his Mars came out early and his burst was unstoppable. I ended up losing, meaning I took 2nd place in the tournament overall. Honestly, I was super happy with that. I did not expect to do so well. It would have been cool to take first, but I did end up with this neat Crash Muldoon playmat for my placement. I went 3-0 in the elimination games, 1 in the semifinals, then went 1-2 in the finals, all with a deck that comes out to 84 SAS according to DOK. It was a memorable night of Keyforge, and I had an awesome time. But it was getting late, and I had another busy day of Winds of Exchange tomorrow. Alright guys, we are here at RIW Hobbies and Games for day 2 of the Keyforge Winds of Exchange pre-release tournament. So this is actually my second time here at the store and I really like it. It's very spacious, there's a really nice play area, the staff are friendly, lots of product, and overall, yeah, I'm really glad to be here for day 2. So seeing as we made it all the way to the finals yesterday, hopefully we can match that today, or even maybe make it to the #1 spot and win the whole thing, but we'll just have to see what pods we get, what sort of decks we end up opening, and how we draw. We'll just have to see how it goes. So I'm going to head over to the tournament area, and I will see you guys over there. Day 2 took place at RIW Hobbies and Games in Livonia. We had a similarly sized crowd to the one in Portage, and there were even a few familiar faces from last night. Chris, the person who beat me in the finals, was there, and Randall, who had beaten in round 2. My dad and brother were also there as well, as was Dave O, an awesome guy who's really been spearheading the revival of the local Keyforge scene here in Michigan, particularly in Midland, where we'd be heading tomorrow. The tournament began, and we all started cracking open our 3 new Winds of Exchange decks. My 3 token options this time were Warrior, Trader, and once again, Prospector. I counted myself extremely lucky. Looking through my pods, I was immediately drawn to a Maverick Symposium in one of my Brobnar pods, the result of a Frost Giant appearing in it. The pod also contained Rant and Writhe, Brick, Harmel, Bumpsy, a Ready and Fight effect with Might Club, and an enhanced Blood of Titans, so overall I liked the look of it. The other Brobnar pods just didn't quite compare in my opinion, though one of them did have both a Pelf and Looter Goblin enhanced with 2 capture pips, which could have been potentially handy. I also opened another pretty solid Equidon pod that I included in my alliance. Like last time, it had plenty of Ember control, generous offer, double closed door, shrewd investor, and transitory philosopher. I also really enjoyed the combo of shrewd investor plus insurance policy, and there was an auction off for artifact control, and the double Equity outpost, offering some insane card draw and efficiency. I couldn't turn it down. And lastly, I included a decent Starlines pod. It had double Gruntwork, allowing me some control over what got tokenized, and double Echo Reflector, great to throw on my Frost Giant from before. There was board control with the Quintrino Warp, archiving with the Recorded History, and the touch more Ember control with Specialist Guthrak and Rogue Operation. The pods I passed on were a couple pretty mid Saurian pods, an OK Sanctum, and a different Equidon pod that didn't have nearly as much stealing, but did have double Trading Frenzy with Exchange Program, which could have been sweet to pull off. In the end, my final alliance included Brobnar, Equidon, and Starlines with the Prospector token, and I felt I had a pretty solid setup. The first game was just a pretty average game of Keyforge. I was up against a guy named Sean, not the same Sean from last night, a different Sean, and he was utilizing the Cleric token. Cleric's capture could get annoying from time to time, but I got an early lead, was able to steal his Ember, and continued reaping out for the win. Game 2 was against Alex, also known as the legendary Lord of Winter, and he was using the Trooper token in his alliance. We both had very similar Starlines and Equidon pods, though he had a token of appreciation, which was neat to see. It was an extremely tight game. I had some solid Brobnar plays, and things were back and forth the whole match. As we neared our 3rd keys, I had answers in hand, and even had my Frost Giant equipped with an Echo Reflector, meaning Alex's keys cost 9. Despite this, he managed to generate a ton of tokens on an Equidon turn and pull off Token of Appreciation for the win, even with his expensive key cost. If it wasn't for the key cheat, I had more answers in hand and could have potentially pulled out a win, but it was still really cool to see a Token of Appreciation pulled off in a sealed environment like this one. My record was 1-1. Game 3 I was up against Randall, the same one from last night. He was using the Fish token, and his deck had lots of ways to stall keys. However, despite that, my overwhelming board presence and Ember control was more than enough to beat him. I even got hit with an R&R, but even though he was able to stall keys, he wasn't able to generate enough momentum of his own, and so I got the W, putting my record at 2-1. Game number 4, I was up against a guy named Asher, who was using the Warrior token. Just like last game, I managed to maintain an overwhelming board presence while stealing lots of his Ember. I had lots of threats on the board that he just wasn't able to deal with all at once, one of which was my Transitory Philosopher. One turn, I used the Philosopher's action ability to steal a whopping 4 Ember, 1 for each of his artifacts. I did get hit with a Rant and Writhe that he played against me, but later, in a critical moment, it ended up getting tokenized, so he was unable to stop me. I was 3-1 going into the final match. My last game of the day was against someone named Andy. He had the Squire token, and his deck was super fast. His Brobnar pod had a ton of Ember pips because of a Cursed Relic and a separate Equidon pod that he wasn't using in his alliance. He was also able to burst with a membership drive in his Sanctum and a couple Celestial Gorms, which kept bouncing my Equity outpost to my hand, clogging it up big time, and enabling him to play the Ember pips on his artifacts multiple times. The game was full of unfortunate incidents for me. Early on, I had a creature equipped with insurance policy that he bounced back to my hand with bubbles, and mid-game, I had a pretty bad misplay that allowed him to forge his second key, mostly just bad sequencing on my end. It was difficult to make much progress through my deck because he kept returning my outposts to my hand. Not only could I not use them for their intended purpose, but that lack of efficiency kept me from being able to draw important cards such as my Ecodon Seal or R&R. He won the game pretty easily, putting my final record for the day at 3-2. In the end, I was just glad to have a winning record for the day. Afterwards, I took a look at the alliance I'd created in DOK, and it came out to 82 SAS. The event was a ton of fun, the staff and players were all friendly, and we all managed to have a great time. Hilariously, Chris, the guy who beat me in the finals last night and took first overall, took first place again in this event, meaning he won 2 of these events right in a row. He was decked out with the Prospector token and a whole bunch of power cards, so he was well equipped to go far in the tournament, but that was pretty funny to see. And after a long afternoon of Keyforge, it was time to head home and prepare for the final day of the pre-release tour. Alrighty, so that was the end of event number 2. So, wow, 3-2. I'm feeling pretty happy about that. I mean, a winning record is usually all I'm asking for when I go into these tournaments, so I'm happy to get a 3-2 winning record. So, me and a few others are gonna go grab some dinner real quick, and then I'm gonna be going home, trying to get some good rest for tomorrow for the final event, day 3 of the Winds of Exchange pre-release trifecta tournament. So I'll see you then. Day 3 arrived, and I was on my way to Midland. My dad and brother attended this event as well, just like yesterday. The name of the store is Modern Explorers Guild, and now this is a place I'm quite familiar with. We have monthly Keyforge events here. When it first started, we did lots of 2-deck AOA Sealed Alliance, then we did a WoW Sealed Alliance event, and recently we even did a 2-deck Sealed Unchained tournament. And now it was time for the Winds of Exchange pre-release event. The person I mentioned from yesterday, Dave O, has done a lot of work in this place to revive the local Keyforge scene, alongside others such as Matt, or Mordavas, and Josh, or Yo-Yo Milkworm. We've all been super appreciative of their efforts, and it's been an absolute joy to have a nearby game store to play Keyforge at. The timer began for us to start cracking open our pre-release kits, and pod analysis began. My token selection wasn't quite as lucky as it had been in the previous events. I had Explorer, Researcher, and Grumpus to choose from. No Prospector this time. Right away I opened an Ecodon pod containing Antiquities Dealer, who brought along a Gorm of Am, a Strange Gizmo, and a Universal Recycle Bin. I was super tempted to include it in my Alliance deck just for the fun aspect of it, but the rest of the pod was pretty bad, so I had to pass on it sadly. In all honesty, most of my pods were pretty mid this time around, so I had to choose the best of what I had available. I took a Sanctum pod from one deck that had double Glorious Few, one enhanced with a damage and the other with an extra Ember, and I hoped I'd be able to get good value out of them if I started falling behind on board. Then I took 2 pods from another deck, leaving one deck untouched. The Mars from this deck had a Legacy Grabber Jammer, Crystal Hive, Total Recall, and a Mars Needs Ember. All pretty decent cards along with a couple Vat Minders. The Starlines pod I chose had some important board control, a Quintrino Warp and a Selective Preservation. I also liked the look of Transporter Platform with Officer Hawkins and the Echo Reflector, enabling some burst potential. The deck I didn't take any pods from, I did take the token from, the Martian Researcher, which I figured could synergize nicely with the Mars pod containing Crystal Hive and the like. And yes, for these events, even if you didn't use any pods from a given single deck, you could still take the token creature from that deck, which isn't technically possible in regular Alliance. Like I said before, most of my pods weren't really anything to write home about, so I put them to the side. I'll have them here on screen so you guys can take a look at them and strategize for yourself. Let me know down in the comments if there's anything you would have done differently. So my final loadout was Sanctum Mars Starlines with the Researcher token. Game 1, I was up against the legendary Mordavas, a fated matchup that I knew was bound to happen. He was using the Defender token at 2 power 1 armor, and his Sanctum was fast. At least, it looked that way to me in part because he got off to an incredible start, instantly dropping a huge Sanctum board and membership driving it. Right off the bat, I fell too far behind to catch up. My deck didn't have enough board control, let alone enough Ember control, so I just floundered for a few turns before he put me out of my misery. I did have a Martyr of the Vault, but I couldn't really do anything with it. After that game, I was not hopeful about the rest of this event, and I was rapidly losing faith in my deck. I considered swapping out my pods, but decided against it. There was just nothing else I really desired to try. Game 2 was against a local named Peter, who was using Priest. This game went very different from the previous one. I was able to get some good early Crystal Hive value with the Mars board I generated, and even some upgraded Hawkins TP value. Everything was going to plan. I truly outraced him. The pace was too much for him to keep up with, and I got the dub. I was 1-1. Game 3 was against Sean. No, not Sean from the first event, not Day 2 Sean either, this was a third totally different Sean. He had the Trooper token, which enabled some really great epic poem value for him. Early on in the game, I was archiving lots of Mars stuff with my researchers, and his troopers were putting in plenty of work too, although they were putting lots of vulnerable Ember on the board as well. Sure enough, once I drew into my Contrino Warp and played it, all those destroyed dinos gave their Ember to me, and that's where the tide really changed in my favor and he couldn't quite recover. I did get hit with a Rant and Rive at one point, which hurt, and at another point I finally picked up all my Mars archives and played it, but got punished with the red alert. It was an extremely tight game. It all came down to our third keys, but unfortunately for him, his second Rant and Rive got tokenized, and my last resort burst was enough to seal my victory. And in case he did have an answer to my final burst and reach checked himself, I had a Nidapult on board and Martyr in hand for one last delay. But I didn't end up needing it, and I ended up going 2-1 into the fourth and final match. Game 4, I was up against someone named Court, and she was utilizing the classic Berserker token. Her deck just wanted to spam out a huge board, and that's exactly what it did. Her board was filled with tons of massive bodies that just reaped out over and over. But that's exactly what I planned for. I played Glorious Few from an empty board 3 times in a row. One turn, I played the Damage Enhanced copy for 15 Ember, then I played the Ember Enhanced copy for 16 total Ember, and then next turn I reshuffled and drew back into the Damage Enhanced copy. The damage pip killed one of her particularly dangerous creatures, so I played it for 14 Ember. The game actually ended up being really tight, since by the end, both of us were just forging turn after turn, but I had key advantage, and I checked for my third key at over 40 Ember while she forged her second. Of course, she wasn't able to prevent that, and so I took the W. The game was lightning fast, and the triple Glorious Few play was a super flashy end to the event. It was awesome. And so, when everything was said and done, I had a 3-1 record, which I was very happy with. This time, Mordivas won the whole event with a clean 4-0 sweep. It was a lot of fun getting to see so many familiar faces participate, and overall, it was the perfect ending to a weekend of Keyforge fun. I was Keyforged out, ready for a break, and was looking forward to letting my mind rest when I got back home. Day 3 came to an end, and so concluded my Winds of Exchange pre-release tour. And there we have it. 3 consecutive days of Keyforge goodness. I had an absolute blast, and I'm glad I got to take you guys along with me on the journey. The competition was fierce, playing WoW was a wild experience as always, and we all got plenty of practice in with our deck analysis skills. It was always really interesting to see the pods and tokens people chose from their selections. That thought process is always cool to witness. And also, I'll leave links to all the decks I opened over the weekend in the description below. But that'll be it for now. I just want to give a huge thank you to all the stores who participated and to everyone who helped organize the events. It was a ton of fun and wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.